This is the Holy Land Timeline, bringing the Bible to life from the Holy Land.
Walking the ground where history meets faith. You're listening to the Holy Land Path on the Holy Land Timeline. Here are your hosts, Ethan and Sarah.
Welcome to the Holy Land Path. It is just so wonderful to have you with us again today.
Yeah, it really is.
Because, imagine you are digging in the unforgiving, sun-baked sands of the Sinai Desert. You are days away from any sort of civilization, right? You're excavating the ruins of this isolated, ancient Israelite outpost.
Just covered in dust, baking in the heat.
Exactly. And you brush away the dirt from a massive, shattered clay jar. And as the ancient Hebrew letters sort of, come into focus, you realize you have just unearthed an official state-sponsored document from the 8th century BCE.
Right.
And this document essentially says that the God of Israel has a wife.
Which is just, it's a completely mind-blowing thing to pull out of the sand.
It really is. And, when we talk about history, especially the religious history of the ancient Near East, there is this massive temptation to view it all through the clean, polished lens of the final written text.
Oh, absolutely. We want it to be neat.
We want the past to be straightforward, but out in the desert, the archaeological record it doesn't care about our neat and tidy categories. It is messy, it's raw, and it is beautifully, wonderfully complicated.
Yeah, and that tension between the polished final text and the raw dirt of archaeology, that's the heartbeat of what we do.
Mm-hmm.
When you look at the physical data pulled from the ground, the picture rarely conforms to a simple, linear timeline of belief. It challenges a lot of the retrospective simplicity that we tend to, project onto the people who actually lived out these ancient narratives.
Which is exactly why we are bringing you, the listener, on this specific journey today. Our mission for today's deep dive is to travel deep into the arid landscape of the Sinai Peninsula.
Yeah, and you really have to picture this. It's a vast, desolate expanse.
Just howling wind, heat shimmering off the limestone rocks, and out in the middle of this absolute nowhere, there is an isolated, imposing hill. In Arabic, it's called Kuntillet Ajrud.
Right, which translates to the solitary hill of wells.
Or in Hebrew, Horvat Temen. It sits surrounded by the Wadi Quraya Valley, roughly, 15 kilometers west of the ancient Gaza Road. And when I say remote, it feels entirely disconnected from the rest of the planet.
Oh, it is a punishing environment. Completely punishing. This hill rises about 25 meters above the surrounding valley floor, and it essentially stands guard over a few shallow wells that manage to capture high groundwater.
Which is everything out there.
It's the only thing. In antiquity, in a landscape that unforgiving, a reliable water source dictated all human movement. It was the only reason anyone would ever stop there.
So our goal is to explore this single, highly enigmatic site. We are looking at a snapshot that is perfectly preserved from the 9th to the 8th century BCE.
A literal time capsule.
Exactly, a time capsule of ancient Israelite life. We're going to uncover how the physical artifacts found here reveal the profound, raw, and sometimes really startling reality of the religious struggles happening during the period of the biblical kings.
And the stakes for understanding this site, they really couldn't be higher for anyone interested in the biblical world.
Because it's not just broken pots.
No, this solitary hill contains texts, administrative documents, and drawings that fundamentally challenge our modern assumptions about the ancient journey toward pure monotheism. What we find here gives us the exact, unfiltered historical context for the fierce battles that the biblical prophets fought against idolatry.
It shows us the monumental cultural tide they were swimming against.
Vividly, in full color.
So, to truly grasp the explosive nature of what was found inside this site, we first have to talk about how incredibly well-preserved and just geographically bizarre it is.
Yeah, the modern history of it is wild.
It's a geopolitical thriller. Let's start with the timeline of its discovery.
So modern awareness of this hill actually begins way back around 1870 with an English Orientalist named Edward Henry Palmer.
Okay, 1870, what is he doing out in the Sinai?
He was exploring, meticulously documenting the geography on behalf of the Palestine Exploration Fund. And he noted this hill with its ruined walls. He actually found some pottery shards, including one with what he thought was a Phoenician letter inscribed on it.
Wow, just lying on the surface.
Yeah, it's just right there. But based on the location near an ancient trade route, he proposed it might be a Roman-era site. Specifically, a way station called Gypsaria that's mentioned on later ancient maps.
Well, and if you are a Victorian explorer in 1870 and you see a ruined rectangular fortress-like structure near a trade route, a Roman way station is a highly logical deduction.
Oh, totally.
Because the Romans built those square forts absolutely everywhere.
It was a completely reasonable assumption for the time. And honestly, that assumption held for almost a century. It wasn't until 1967 that the Israeli archaeologist Benno Rothenberg visited the site and started picking up surface sherds.
And by 1967, archaeology had evolved a lot, right?
Dramatically, specifically in the realm of ceramic typology.
So, for those listening who might not be familiar with that term, can you explain how ceramic typology works as a dating mechanism? Like, why does a breaking piece of clay instantly tell an archaeologist they're in the wrong millennium?
Think of it like analyzing the shape of a car. If you see a photograph of a car with huge tail fins, you immediately know it's from the 1950s.
Right, you don't need to see the engine or the license plate.
Exactly. The stylistic features tell you the era. Pottery works the exact same way. The way an ancient potter folds a rim, the angle of a handle, the chemical composition of the glaze, these techniques change predictably over centuries.
So Rothenberg looks at a handle and just knows.
Yeah, he looked at the rims and handles of the sherds at Kuntillet, Ajrud, and realized instantly that Palmer had been off by 1,000 years. These weren't Roman, they were from the Iron Age, specifically the period of the Judean monarchy.
Which changes everything. Going from a standard Roman outpost to a biblical-era puzzle changes the entire landscape of the discipline.
It triggered a massive shift in focus. That realization set the stage for the primary excavations, which were led by Zeev Meshel in 1975 and 1976. Over 3 intensive seasons, Meshel and his team meticulously uncovered the site.
But the story of the artifacts doesn't end when they were pulled from the sand, does it?
No, not at all. The geopolitical fate of these objects is fascinating, because they didn't just quietly sit in a university basement, they became entangled in modern Middle Eastern diplomacy.
Right, following the peace treaty.
Exactly. Following the 1979 peace treaty between Israel and Egypt, the Sinai Peninsula was gradually transferred back to Egyptian control. As part of that agreement, the artifacts excavated by Israel at sites like Kuntillet, Ajrud were handed over to Egypt in 1993.
And they just went into storage.
Yeah, placed in storage, largely out of public view. For years, the international academic community wondered about their condition. And then during the 2011 Egyptian Revolution, amid all this widespread chaos and institutional breakdown, looters broke into a museum storage facility in Kantara.
Oh man, that is the ultimate nightmare scenario for anyone who cares about human heritage.
It's terrifying. Countless artifacts were stolen. And for a period, the archaeological world really thought the Kuntillet Ajrud finds these irreplaceable inscriptions that redefine our understanding of the biblical era were lost to the black market forever.
Destined to be locked away in private collections or just destroyed.
Right. But thankfully, a few months later, Egyptian authorities announced that a large number of the looted items, including the most vital inscriptions from this site, had been recovered by antiquities police.
Oh, wow.
Yeah, and they were moved to a highly secure location in Cairo.
That survival feels almost providential. It really highlights how fragile our connection to the past truly is. I mean, we almost lost the evidence before we fully understood it.
We came very close.
So the artifacts survived, thankfully. But let's go back to the site itself in the 1970s. When Meshel starts digging, what exactly does he uncover? Because when I was reading through the architectural reports in our sources, my immediate reaction was that this place looks like an ancient, heavily fortified truck stop or motel.
A motel.
Yeah, but one that is clearly subsidized by a massive federal government.
That analogy actually captures the essence of the site perfectly. The architecture is perplexing because it sends mixed signals.
How so?
Well, the site consists of 2 main structures. The larger one, known as Building A, measures roughly 29 by 15 meters. If you approach it from the outside, it looks exactly like a typical Israelite military fortress from the Iron Age.
Okay.
It's rectangular, it has 4 distinct corner towers, and it aggressively dominates the high ground. But the moment you walk through the gates and look at the internal layout, the military fortress illusion completely falls apart.
Wait, if I am building a military fort in the ancient Near East, I am going to use a casemate wall, correct?
Yeah.
Those are the standard defensive structures of the period.
Yes, exactly. A casemate wall consists of 2 parallel stone walls with hollow rooms built between them. In times of peace, soldiers sleep in those rooms or use them for storage.
And in times of war.
In times of siege, you fill those hollow rooms with dirt and rubble to create a massive, impenetrable, solid barrier against battering rams. Building A at Kuntillet Ajrud does not have casemate walls.
So it looks like a fort from a distance to intimidate people, but if an army actually showed up, it wouldn't hold.
Precisely. It's almost theatrical. Instead of defensive kill zones or casemate rooms, Building A features long, continuous storage rooms. And even more uniquely, it features what archaeologists call the bench room.
A bench room.
Yeah. When you enter the building, you pass through a small courtyard into a specific elongated room lined with low, plastered stone benches. This is actually where many of the most spectacular artifacts were concentrated.
Benches suggest a place of gathering, right?
Gathering, waiting, communal interaction, or perhaps of giving audience to an official. You don't build a lounge at the front gate of a military bunker.
No, you definitely don't. And then sitting right next to it is Building B.
Building B is smaller, sitting just to the east, but it is architecturally stunning, especially considering its location. It seems designed to control the only viable pathway up the hill.
And what makes it so stunning?
The sheer luxury of its finish. Its walls and floors were covered in brilliant, high-quality white plaster. And not just plain plaster. The walls featured highly decorated painted geometric and floral patterns in vibrant red, yellow, and black.
Walk me through the logistics of that for a second. You are in the middle of a brutal desert. Making plaster in the ancient world isn't like buying a bag at a hardware store.
Not at all.
You have to mine limestone, heat it to incredibly high temperatures, which requires massive amounts of wood, and then mix it with vast quantities of water.
Water that you desperately need for drinking in the Sinai.
Exactly. You don't expend those kinds of survival resources just to make a military barracks look pretty. So if it looks like a fortress but lacks the defensive capabilities, and it has luxury plaster in a wasteland, what was it? A trade hub, a religious center.
Synthesizing the evidence points us toward a very specific function. It sits near a major crossroad connecting the Mediterranean coast to the Gulf of Aqaba and the Red Sea.
Okay.
Its lack of true military layout, combined with this high-level, resource-intensive architectural design, strongly suggests it was an official, state-sponsored way station.
Like a royal caravanserai.
Exactly. Built and supplied by the government, likely the Northern Kingdom of Israel, to control trade, resupply state-sanctioned caravans, and project royal authority deep into the desert.
So it is a state-sponsored outpost, a heavily funded oasis of government control where caravans, diplomats, and merchants could stop, resupply, and find protection under the banner of the Israelite king.
Right. That's the most logical conclusion.
But moving from the macro architecture of the buildings to the micro details of daily survival is where this site truly comes alive. We transition from the stone walls to the organic reality of the people who actually live there.
This is where the brutal desert environment ironically becomes the archaeologist's greatest ally.
Because it preserves things.
Incredibly well. The extremely dry, stable climate of the Sinai Peninsula preserved organic materials that have completely rotted away in almost every other site in the Levant. In places like Jerusalem or Samaria, moisture and bacteria destroy wood, cloth, and food within decades.
But at Kuntillet,
We find an astonishing level of organic preservation.
explain what kinds of organic materials survived, because reading about this, some of these finds feel like they were dropped there yesterday.
They really do. For example, they found whole, intact pomegranates with the skin still preserved.
Wow.
They found a nearly complete woven sieve made of delicate plant fibers, the kind you would use to sift grain. And crucially, they found the actual timber used in the construction of the roofs and the door frames.
Let's focus on that timber, because the wood tells a massive geopolitical story all its own.
It does. The bulk of the wood used for roofing was local tamarisk. Tamarisk grows in the wadis and survives on very little water, so using it makes perfect sense. You use the resources immediately available to you.
Right, you chop down what's nearby.
But they didn't only use tamarisk. Paleobotanical analysis, examining the cellular structure of the wood fragments, revealed pieces of cedar and Persian pistachio.
Wait, cedar comes from Lebanon. That's hundreds of miles to the north.
Hundreds of miles. And Persian pistachio grows in the high mountainous regions of southern Sinai.
Which means they weren't just scraping by on whatever scrub brush they could cut down.
Not at all.
They were importing high-quality luxury building materials across hundreds of miles of hostile terrain. Finding cedar wood in the middle of the Sinai proves that this outpost was deeply integrated into extensive, state-level trade networks.
And that level of state supply brings us to the textiles. I mean, it's amazing. They found over 120 pieces of fabric at this site.
Which is a huge number for an ancient site.
It is the largest collection of textiles from any Israelite site of this period. And the composition of these fabrics is incredibly revealing. Almost all of them are finely woven, high-quality linen. Only 11 pieces of wool were found in the entire excavation.
Wait, hold on. That seems completely backward. If you are an ancient society operating in an arid environment, your primary livestock are sheep and goats, right?
Right.
And pastoralism produces wool. Wool should be absolutely everywhere.
It should be.
So finding almost exclusively high-quality linen suggests a level of wealth or official state supply where garments are being imported, likely from Egypt or northern urban centers, rather than being woven locally from the nearby flocks.
That is the exact conclusion archaeologists draw. Linen is labor-intensive to produce from flax, requiring abundant water for the retting process. It is a prestige fabric in this context.
Okay, that makes sense.
But there's an even more striking detail hidden within these textiles. Among the fragments, they found 2 pieces of what biblical law calls shatnez.
Okay, for you listening, shatnez is a highly specific biblical term. It refers to a garment made of a mixture of wool and linen woven together. If you read Leviticus and Deuteronomy, wearing shatnez is strictly, unequivocally forbidden for an Israelite.
It is a paramount prohibition in the priestly codes. Yet here at an official Israelite outpost, we find it. And it wasn't just a haphazard or accidental weave.
What did it look like?
One of these pieces of shatnez featured red-dyed wool intricately woven with blue-dyed linen.
Oh, wow.
It was a deliberate, highly decorative, and expensive choice.
Let me play devil's advocate here because this seems totally contradictory. You have a state-sponsored Israelite outpost funded by the Israelite government, but they are blatantly wearing garments that their own religious laws strictly forbid.
Yeah, it's quite the paradox.
Were these people just massive hypocrites, or does this suggest that the strict legal codes prohibiting mixed fabrics hadn't been widely enforced yet, or maybe didn't even exist in the form we know them today?
That is the brilliant, unsettling question this kind of archaeology forces us to ask. It strongly suggests that the religious reality on the ground in the 8th century BCE was far more fluid than the later biblical texts portray.
Because they're just wearing it openly.
Right. The strict enforcement of Levitical purity laws, like the ban on shatnez, may have been a later development. Or perhaps it was an idealized standard maintained by the priesthood in Jerusalem that simply didn't apply, or was ignored, by state officials operating on the frontier.
They valued the aesthetic and the status of the red and blue dyed fabric more than a theological prohibition, or they were just ignorant of it.
Exactly.
Yeah.
It is a raw look at what people were actually wearing versus what the law codes demanded. And we see a similar level of logistical flex when we look at their diet.
Oh, the food. Yes.
The animal bones found in the refuse heaps at Kuntillet, Ajrud, are a logistical marvel. We find the standard sheep and goat bones, which you would expect, but we also find fish bones.
Fish bones.
Okay.
In the Sinai Desert.
Yes. And not just any fish marine biologists identified fish from both the Mediterranean Sea and the Red Sea.
Walk me through the mechanics of that. You are sitting on a hill in a barren desert. You are eating fish caught in the Mediterranean to the far north and fish caught in the Red Sea to the south. How do you transport fish across a scorching desert in the 8th century BCE without it turning into a toxic, rotting mess?
The only way to achieve this is through intense salt curing and rapid, highly organized caravan relays.
So they're bringing in massive amounts of salt.
You catch the fish, you likely use salt harvested from the Dead Sea region to aggressively cure and dry it, and then you move it quickly along state-protected routes. The presence of these fish bones speaks volumes about the efficiency of the trade networks and the sheer logistical muscle of the state supporting this outpost.
It's basically a federal supply chain. And regarding how these people live together, the architecture of Building A gives us a massive clue. We mentioned the staircases in the central courtyard earlier. Flanking these staircases on the ground floor were shared, communal kitchens with large ovens.
Which tells us a great deal about the social structure of the inhabitants. They aren't living in separate private family units with their own domestic hearths, which is the standard layout for a typical Israelite village.
Right.
This implies a communal living situation. A garrison of soldiers, a group of state officials, or a collective household operating as a single unit. It was a community of purpose stationed there for a job.
But to figure out exactly who was funding that job, we have to talk about the mud, the pottery, because this is where the puzzle gets incredibly geopolitical.
The ceramic evidence is arguably the most crucial piece of the puzzle for identifying the geopolitics of Kuntillet Ajrud. The first major revelation is actually what excavators didn't find.
And what was missing?
Out of all the pottery collected, there was absolutely no Negevite pottery.
And why is that absence so loud?
Because Negevite pottery, which is handmade, coarse, and easily identifiable, is the absolute hallmark of the local desert nomads, the Bedouin-type populations of the Negev and Sinai during the Iron Age. If you go to almost any other site in the region from this period, Negevite pottery is everywhere, indicating trade and interaction with the locals.
Oh, wow. I didn't catch the implication of that at first. If there is zero local pottery, that means this outpost was actively walled off from the surrounding population.
Highly walled off.
This wasn't a friendly local watering hole where everyone mingled and traded. This was an exclusive, highly secure, insular government bubble. They were paranoid, or at least highly restrictive, about who was allowed inside.
Exactly the right deduction. It was an exclusive state enterprise. But whose enterprise? That brings us to the science of petrography.
Petrography.
Yes, which involves taking a microscopic slice of the pottery and literally testing the chemical and mineral makeup of the clay. Because different geological regions have different mineral signatures in their dirt, you can pinpoint exactly where a pot was made before it was transported to the desert.
So what did the petrography reveal about the pottery at Kuntillet Ajrud?
It revealed two distinct origins that shouldn't normally be together.
Yeah.
The smaller, everyday vessels, the bowls, the jugs, the cups, were made from clay that originated in the northern kingdom of Israel, specifically the region of Samaria.
Okay, the north.
But the massive pithoi, these enormous heavy storage jars that held the essential grain, oil, and water, were made from clay sourced from the area of Jerusalem down in the southern kingdom of Judah.
Let's frame this politically. After the death of King Solomon, the nation split into two often warring factions, the Kingdom of Israel in the north and the Kingdom of Judah in the south.
And they fought border wars constantly.
Right. But here, deep in the southern desert, you have an outpost staffed by northerners using northern bowls, but supplied with massive southern storage jars. Why would the south supply a northern outpost?
It points to a very specific, rare window of historical alliance. Historically, we are likely looking at the era of King Ahab of Israel and King Jehoshaphat of Judah.
Oh, interesting.
The geopolitical landscape of the 9th century BCE was dominated by the rising threat of the Aramean kingdom in Damascus. The biblical text itself tells us that the threat from Damascus forced Ahab and Jehoshaphat into an alliance.
They had to team up.
Exactly. They stopped fighting each other and actually worked together, even attempting joint maritime trade expeditions out of the Red Sea port of Ezion-Geber.
So Kuntillet Ajrud is the physical evidence of that treaty. It's a joint federal project. The Northern Kingdom provides the personnel and the administrative oversight, and the Southern Kingdom, which actually controls the geographical access to the southern deserts, provides the heavy logistical supply chain.
It is a stunning synchronization of archaeology and history. It really is.
But, as fascinating as the geopolitics, the diet, and the textiles are, the physical items only tell us the logistics of their survival.
Right.
The writings found at this site, the actual words left behind, tell us who they were and what they believed. And that brings us to the most dangerous thing found in the desert.
Yes. We are moving from the physical architecture to the intellectual architecture of the site. Because for a remote desert outpost, Kuntillet Ajrud was astonishingly literate.
Astoundingly so. Archaeologists recovered over 50 distinct inscriptions written on pottery, carved into stone vessels, and painted directly onto the wall plaster.
For a site of this size, that is a massive corpus of text.
It is. And it wasn't just a single scribe making inventory lists. We see a highly educated, multi-scriptural presence using both the Hebrew script and the Phoenician script.
Right.
Why would Israelite scribes be writing in Phoenician?
Because the Phoenician script was the prestige language of the era. It was the international language of diplomacy, high culture, and advanced administration across the Levant, much like French was in 18th century Europe, or English is today.
So using it was a status symbol.
Exactly. Using Phoenician signaled that this was a high-level, sophisticated operation.
But the epigraphers, the scholars who study ancient handwriting, noticed some fascinating linguistic quirks hidden in the spelling right.
Yes, and this is where the detective work gets brilliant. Some of the text written on the plaster walls used the prestigious Phoenician letters, but the scribe spelled the words using Judean Southern orthographic habits.
Oh, wow.
Conversely, the text written using the Hebrew script heavily used Northern Israelite spellings.
Give us an example of how a northern spelling differs from a southern spelling, because I think that really grounds the concept for us.
The clearest example is how they spelled names that end with a reference to the divine name, Yahweh. In the southern kingdom of Judah, if your name was Obadiah, the suffix was spelled Yahu. But in the northern kingdom of Israel, their dialect shortened that suffix to simply yo.
Okay, so it would be Obadiah.
Exactly. So the name would be pronounced as spelled Obadio. The inscriptions at Kuntillet Ajrud overwhelmingly use the northern yo suffix. We see names like Obadio and Shemario. It confirms linguistically a very strong northern Israelite presence among the personnel.
It is exactly like finding a document written today that spells the word color with a U instead of just an O. You instantly know the writer was educated in a British system rather than an American one.
That's a great comparison.
So what exactly were these scribes writing about?
The texts range from mundane administrative labels to highly formalized correspondence. On the administrative side, we have inscriptions explicitly mentioning the title Sar-ur, which translates to the governor of the city or the commander of the fortress.
Which absolute confirms it wasn't a rogue settlement, it was a state site managed by an appointed governor.
Exactly. But the letters are where we begin to see the theological mindset of these people shine through.
Yes, the letters.
We see epistolary text letters that follow strict, highly polite formulas. A typical opening reads, "Message of X, say to Y, I bless you." What is vital for historical context is that these letter formulas perfectly match the polite letter-writing formats found in older neighboring cultures.
Like Ugarit. Specifically, the Ugaritic and Akkadian traditions from centuries prior. It shows that these Israelite scribes weren't inventing things in a vacuum. They were fully plugged into the broader, ancient Near Eastern scribal traditions.
Now, here is where we need to tread carefully into the mindset of the ancient world. Let's look at the specific blessings used in these letters because they utilize a localized deity concept.
Yes, this is crucial.
In these formulas, the writers don't just say, I bless you by Yahweh. They use very specific geographical tags. They write, I bless you by Yahweh of Samaria, and on other jars, I bless you by Yahweh of Teman.
Right.
Now, if you were listening to this and you grew up with the biblical text, your brain might be hitting a roadblock. The core of biblical faith, the Shema, is the Lord our God, the Lord is one. How can there be a God of Samaria and a God of Pim? Are they talking about two different gods?
Making this conceptual leap is perhaps the most crucial step in understanding ancient religion. This geographical tagging is the absolute crux of the ancient Near Eastern mindset.
In the surrounding Canaanite, Syrian, and Phoenician cultures, you didn't just worship a generic god named Baal. You worshiped Baal of Hermon, or Baal of Hazor, or Baal of Lebanon.
I've always thought of it like localized franchises of a deity. The corporate headquarters is the same, but the local branch has its own specific manager and jurisdiction.
That is a phenomenal analogy. The deity is believed to manifest differently or have a specific jurisdiction and local flavor in different regions. What the inscriptions at Kuntillet Ajrud prove unequivocally is that many ancient Israelites in the 9th and 8th centuries BCE were treating the God of Israel in the exact same franchise manner.
So they basically split him up.
They conceptualized a Yahweh of Samaria, protecting the northern capital and its king, and a distinct Yahweh of Teman, Teman being a region in the deep south, protecting the southern desert trade routes.
This is a massive light bulb moment for anyone trying to read the Bible in its original context.
Oh, completely.
If you read the books compiled by what scholars call the Deuteronomist books, like Deuteronomy, Joshua, and Kings, the authors are fiercely, almost obsessively, fighting for the centralization of worship in Jerusalem. They are constantly hammering home the phrase, the Lord our God, the Lord is one.
And when you read those biblical texts in isolation, you might wonder why the authors are repeating themselves so aggressively.
Right.
Why are they so obsessed with the unity of God and the centralization of the temple?
Right.
The broken jars at Kuntillet Ajrud give us the answer. The biblical writers weren't repeating themselves for poetic effect. They were screaming it because their neighbors, their fellow Israelites, literally believed in multiple localized versions of Yahweh.
They were fighting a literal battle of belief on the ground.
The prophets and the Orthodox scribes were trying to eradicate this franchise mindset. They were fighting to establish that Yahweh of Samaria and Yahweh of Jerusalem were not separate local manifestations, but one singular universal creator.
Which perfectly transitions us from the where of God Samaria, or Teman, to the explosive question of who God was associated with at this outpost. If the Israelites here believed in a localized franchise model, did they also believe in the ancient Near Eastern family model of the gods?
And this brings us to the core mystery of the site.
Yes, the inscription mentioning Yahweh and his Asherah.
This is the specific inscription that fundamentally shook biblical archaeology to its core when it was translated.
And I want to be very clear with our listeners as we explore this. We are looking at the raw, historical, archaeological reality of what some Israelites practiced on the ground in the 8th century BCE. We are not taking a theological side or endorsing a belief system. We are simply reading the mail of people who lived 2,800 years ago to understand their world.
Exactly.
So what exactly did they write?
On two different massive storage jars, what archaeologists designate as Pithos A and Pithos B, and also painted on the plaster walls of the building, excavators found variations of a blessing formula. They read, in ancient Hebrew, "I bless you by Yahweh of Samaria and by his Asherah." And on another vessel, "I bless you by Yahweh of Teman and his Asherah."
And his Asherah. That phrase changes the entire landscape of ancient Israelite religion. It implies a consort, a partner. So who or what is Asherah?
To understand Asherah, we have to look slightly north to the ancient Canaanite city of Ugarit on the Syrian coast. In the ancient texts discovered at Ugarit, which predate Kuntillet Ajrud by several centuries, Asherah is a primary supreme deity.
She's at the top of the pantheon.
She's the mother of the gods, the consort and wife of El, who is the patriarch god of the Canaanite pantheon. She is fundamentally a nurturing, maternal, life-giving mother goddess.
But how did she manifest in Israelite culture? If an Israelite is blessing someone by his Asherah, what physical object are they envisioning?
In the context of ancient Israel, her physical symbol was usually a specialized wooden pole or sometimes a living sacred tree planted directly beside an altar.
A pole or a tree?
Yes. This wooden symbol represented the ancient tree of life motif, which throughout the ancient Near East was a profound symbol of life, immortality, and maternal divine nourishment.
Let me stop you there, because the immediate reaction for someone familiar with modern faith might be total confusion. How do you worship a wooden pole? How does a piece of timber represent a mother goddess?
You don't worship the wood itself. It is an indexical symbol. Think of how a modern nation treats its flag.
Okay.
A flag is just dyed cloth, but you salute it, you defend it, and it represents the entire presence and authority of the nation. In the ancient mind, setting up the wooden Asherah pole beside the altar was a way of invoking the presence, the maternal care, and the protective fertility of the goddess alongside the supreme god.
Okay, so the instinct for someone reading the Bible might be shock. How could Israelites at an official state-sponsored site write about God having a consort? But here's the fascinating twist. The Bible actually confirms this was happening all the time.
Exactly.
Yeah.
The archaeology here isn't contradicting the biblical narrative. It is vividly, almost painfully, illustrating the exact environment the biblical prophets were complaining about.
Right. If you read the books of Kings and Judges, the biblical writers are constantly tearing their hair out over the Asherah.
Oh, yeah.
God commands Gideon to chop down his father's Asherah pole. King Asa in Judah is forced to depose his own mother from being the queen mother because she made a public, abominable image for Asherah.
It was everywhere.
Later on, King Manasseh goes so far as to take a carved Asherah pole and put it right inside the Holy of Holies in the Jerusalem temple.
The historical context provided by Kuntillet Ajrud is vital for understanding those biblical texts. What this site shows us is that for centuries before the Babylonian exile, worshiping the Lord alongside this maternal symbol of Asherah was seemingly acceptable to a large mainstream portion of the population.
It wasn't a fringe cult.
No, this wasn't a fringe cult hiding in caves. It was popular religion, practiced by regular folks, state officials, and even kings.
But why didn't the early prophets stamp it out immediately?
If you look closely at the texts, the early prophets like Elijah fiercely fought against the Canaanite storm god Baal. Baal was seen as a direct rival to Yahweh.
Okay, competitor.
But interestingly, in those early prophetic battles, Asherah is rarely the primary target. Because Asherah was seen as a consort, a complementary maternal figure, she was apparently tolerated for longer.
Wow, I never noticed that distinction.
Yeah, the absolute, uncompromising condemnation and eradication of the Asherah mostly comes later, from the Deuteronomistic historians writing toward the end of the monarchy. As they watched the northern kingdom fall to Assyria and the southern kingdom threatened by Babylon, they realized that any association with these syncretic Canaanite symbols was a fatal compromise of the covenant.
Let's pause for a moment of reflection with a short musical interlude.
sky. Walks in the shadows, say their last goodbye. Yesterday's failures are buried in the deep, a promise kept while the world was asleep. I feel the rhythm of a heart set free. Your light is shining all over me. Every breath is a gift I'm taking. Every moment is a world you're making. The old is gone, the new has begun. Your mercies are new every morning, like the sun through the clouds. Without warning, a river of grace that's starting to flow. Everywhere I look, everywhere I go, I'm singing a song that's wild and true. Everything's beautiful. Everything's new. Oh, I'm walking out with a smile on my face, living in the sunshine of your amazing grace. No more looking back at the wreckage behind. It's a piece of heart and a piece of mind. From the valley floor to the mountain peak, it's your strength I find when I am weak. Your mercies are new every morning, like the sun through the clouds. Without warning, a river of grace that's starting to flow. Everywhere I look, everywhere I go, I'm singing a song that's wild and true. Everything's beautiful. Everything's new. Mercy is rising. Mercy is rising. Hope is shining. Hope is shining. The darkness is over. The day is here. Everything's new. Yeah, your grace is brand new.
Welcome back to the Holy Land Path. Before the break, we uncovered the explosive texts mentioning Yahweh and his Asherah. But, human beings are visual creatures. If these scribes, soldiers, and travelers were writing about this divine association, did they draw it too? This question leads us to the chaotic, absolutely fascinating, and highly controversial art found drawn on these massive storage jars.
The visual world of Kuntillet Ajrud is just as complex and debated as its texts. The drawings on these large pithoi don't look like planned, formal, state-sponsored murals.
They look like doodles, right?
Exactly. They look like a sketchbook. They are scattered, drawn in different styles by different hands, overlapping each other. Some scholars suggest the scribes or artists might have been practicing on the jars before painting the formal murals on the plaster walls.
What kind of imagery were they sketching while they sat out there in the desert?
There is a wide, eclectic variety of motifs. You have a beautiful rendering of a cow suckling a young calf, which is a classic ancient Near Eastern symbol of maternal care and fertility. There is a procession of dignitaries with folded arms, approaching what looks like a ruler. You have archers drawing their bows, and crucially, you have a depiction of the tree of life flanked by ibexes standing directly above a lion.
Let's decode that last one. A tree, flanked by horned animals, standing on the back of a lion. To an ancient viewer, what does that communicate?
To anyone living in the Levant in the 8th century BCE, that specific combination of imagery is a billboard. It is the classic ancient Near Eastern visual shorthand for a female deity, specifically Asherah, or a related Canaanite goddess.
Because of the lion.
The lion is her sacred animal, and the tree represents her life-giving nature.
So we have text mentioning Asherah, and we have symbolic art pointing to Asherah. But the artwork that has sparked the most intense academic warfare is what we call the two figures controversy.
Yes, this single drawing has generated more academic papers than almost anything else at the site.
Let's set the scene for you listening. On Pithos A, directly beneath the Hebrew inscription that reads, "I bless you by Yahweh of Samaria and his Asherah," there is a drawing of two strange, somewhat grotesque figures standing side by side, with their arms interlocking.
Yeah, they're very distinct.
One is slightly taller than the other. They have bovine-like faces, feathered headdresses, and a generally unhuman appearance. The massive question is, who are they supposed to be?
Right. And if you ask the scholar Yigal bin Nun, and several others who follow his line of reasoning, the answer is incredibly obvious. He argues that we shouldn't overcomplicate things.
Which makes sense.
If the text right above the drawing says Yahweh and his Asherah, then the drawing of the larger male figure and the slightly smaller female figure directly beneath it must represent exactly that, Yahweh and Asherah.
It is a very straightforward Occam's razor approach. The text says X, the picture below the text must be X. Bin Nun argues that it makes zero logical sense for an Israelite religious site writing passionately about their own deity to draw foreign, unrelated gods right beneath their own prayer. To him, this represents the only known physical depiction of the God of Israel and his consort.
Yes, that is the argument. But that is by no means the academic consensus. In fact, there is a massive counter-perspective championed by prominent art historians and archaeologists like Shmuel Ahituv and Tali Ornan, who push back incredibly hard against that simple text-to-image correlation.
Why do they reject it? If the text is right there, why isn't it Yahweh?
Because of the strict iconographic rules of the ancient world. Ahituv and Ornan point out that these two figures do not look anything like supreme Levantine deities.
How were supreme deities usually drawn?
Supreme gods in Canaanite and Israelite culture, when they were depicted, were drawn as majestic, human-like kings or warriors, sometimes standing on animals, but rarely merging with them. Mixing grotesque animal-like features, which these figures clearly have, with supreme deities just wasn't common or acceptable in Levantine art at this time.
So if they aren't Yahweh and Asherah, who are they?
Ahituv and Ornan argue that they look exactly like the Egyptian dwarf god Bes.
Bes.
Yeah, Bes was an immensely popular deity throughout the ancient Near East. He's depicted as a squat, slightly comedic, grotesque-looking dwarf with a lion-like face, often wearing a feathered headdress.
But he wasn't a main god.
Crucially, no. Bes wasn't the supreme god.
Huh?
He was a minor apotropaic deity.
Apotropaic meaning protective magic, right?
Yes. Bes was deeply associated with protecting households, warding off evil spirits, and specifically protecting women during childbirth. His image was ubiquitous in Phoenician and Egyptian art. He was the ancient equivalent of a good luck charm or a protective talisman.
So drawing him was just common practice.
Very common. And Ahituv and Ornan argue that you would never use the grotesque, minor figure of Bes to represent the supreme lord of the cosmos. It would be a theological insult.
I think the best analogy I've heard for this is imagining a soldier working in a modern government facility.
Ooh, I like this one.
They have an official classified document in front of them full of serious text, but they are bored, so on the margins of the paper, they doodle a picture of Batman or Mickey Mouse. Right. Just because Mickey Mouse is drawn near the text of a classified military document doesn't mean the classified document is about Mickey Mouse. They just happen to be drawn on the same piece of paper by someone occupying the same space.
That analogy perfectly captures the Ahituv and Ornan perspective. The jars were sketch pads. One scribe wrote a serious blessing using the text Yahweh and his Asherah. Later, another person, or perhaps the same person, casually doodled the figures of Bes, a popular everyday symbol of protection, completely independently of the text above it.
But regardless of whether the drawing is the Egyptian god Bes or a controversial depiction of Asherah, the text remains unshakable. The idea of a female divine presence, an Asherah, clearly existed in the popular culture and religious imagination of these Israelite people.
Without a doubt.
And this brings us to a profound theological aftermath. How did the Orthodox biblical tradition, the scribes, the prophets, and the priests who eventually won the theological war and compiled the Bible, how did they process and transform this deep, seemingly innate human desire for a nurturing, maternal aspect of the divine?
This is a fascinating area of study, and the scholarship of Mark S. Smith is incredibly illuminating here.
What does he suggest?
Smith argues that the Orthodox biblical tradition didn't just smash the physical Asherah poles, burn them, and leave a psychological vacuum.
Because you can't just erase a human need.
Exactly. The physical symbol of the wood and the independent goddess figure were fiercely condemned and eradicated, yes. But the deep human need that she represented, the need for divine maternal care, for approachability, for nurturing wisdom, wasn't erased. It couldn't be. Instead, it was beautifully transformed, elevated, and absorbed into the framework of Orthodox monotheism.
The symbol is destroyed, but the essence is redeemed and relocated into the character of the one God. Walk us through how that transformation actually happens in the biblical text.
We see it most profoundly in the biblical wisdom literature, specifically in the book of Proverbs. In Proverbs chapters 1 through 9, wisdom is vividly personified as a female figure.
Lady Wisdom.
Yes, she cries out in the streets, inviting people to her banquet. She states that she was with God before the creation of the world, acting as a master craftsman at his side. And most tellingly, in Proverbs chapter 3, she's explicitly called a tree of life to those who lay hold of her.
That specific phrasing gives me chills when you put it in historical context. The tree of life was the exact physical symbol and theological domain of the prohibited Asherah pole.
It was her domain entirely.
So the biblical writer is deliberately taking the language of the prohibited idol and applying it to the very orthodox concept of God's divine wisdom. It is a brilliant literary subversion.
It really is.
It's as if the orthodox scribes are saying, you don't need to bow to a wooden pole in the desert to find the tree of life and maternal care. You find all of that perfectly within God's wisdom.
That is exactly the rhetorical strategy. Lady Wisdom becomes the ultimate faithful alternative to the figure of the strange woman, or folly, in Proverbs, which many scholars suggest represents the allure of foreign syncretic cults like that of Asherah.
That makes so much sense.
Wisdom becomes the bride, the companion, the nurturing guide of the faithful Israelite. We see echoes of this highly exalted female language in the Song of Songs as well, where the incredibly passionate, elevated language used for the female protagonist intentionally mirrors ancient divine love poetry.
But if we connect this to the bigger picture, to the very foundation of the biblical narrative, we see this integration of male and female in the divine image right at the beginning, in the book of Genesis.
Yes, the creation account in Genesis 1:27 serves as the theological cornerstone here. It reads, "So God created mankind in his own image. In the image of God he created them. Male and female he created them."
Which is beautiful.
And in its ancient context, this is a radical, subversive theological statement.
Why is it radical?
Because it refuses to divide the divine realm by gender. It doesn't reduce God to human biological terms. Rather, it magnifies the human person in divine terms.
Wow, say more about that.
Well, if humanity as a whole, both male and female together, is required to accurately reflect the image of God, then the divine mystery must ultimately encompass all the perfections, traits, and capacities of both maleness and femaleness perfectly within the one God.
You don't need a separate male storm god and a separate female fertility goddess. The one God is the ultimate source of all paternal strength and all maternal perfection.
Precisely. And this understanding survives and evolves richly in later Jewish thought.
Like with the Shekinah.
Yes, exactly. By the time we get to later Rabbinic Judaism and Jewish mysticism, we see the flourishing of the concept of the Shekinah. The Shekinah represents the localized, indwelling presence of God on earth.
And it's a feminine word, right?
Grammatically, the word is feminine, and the Shekinah is deeply associated with maternal comfort, with weeping for the exiled children of Israel, and with nurturing presence. The human desire for that maternal divine presence never faded from the religious consciousness. It simply found its true, purified, monotheistic home.
This journey from the desert sands to the heights of theology brings us perfectly to our lesson of the week. In each episode, we want to tie all of this archaeology, this ancient language, and this history into a spiritual takeaway. And the theme for today's lesson is heritage and truth.
It is very easy for modern readers to judge the ancients.
Oh, we do it all the time.
When you sit in a comfortable pew today or read the Bible in an armchair with a cup of coffee, the constant prophetic warnings against idolatry can sometimes feel repetitive, maybe even disconnected from reality. You might read Kings or Jeremiah and think, why were they so endlessly obsessed with wooden poles on hills? Why couldn't the Israelites just simply worship the one God? What was the big deal?
It's easy to judge the ancient Israelites when you already know the ending of the story, and you live in a world where monotheism is the dominant cultural assumption.
Exactly. But Kuntillet Ajrud removes our modern blinders and shows us the raw, gritty reality on the ground. The ancient Israelites were not living in a sanitized theological vacuum.
They were in the thick of it.
They were living in a massive, chaotic melting pot of cultures, empires, and competing trade routes. They were deeply, daily tempted by syncretism, the blending of different beliefs. They were tempted to mix the true, demanding faith of the Sinai covenant with the immediate, tangible comforts of the local Canaanite fertility cults and Egyptian protective charms.
Because it was easy.
It was popular, it was culturally acceptable, it made political sense for alliances, and as we see at this specific site, it was even state-sponsored.
So when a modern believer sees this physical evidence of Israel's struggles, it shouldn't weaken their faith or their trust in the biblical text. If anything, understanding this context should do the exact opposite.
It absolutely should strengthen our profound appreciation for the biblical prophets and the faithful scribes who preserved the text.
Uh-huh.
They were not preaching to the choir.
Not at all.
They were fighting an immense, seemingly impossible uphill battle against the popular culture, against the economic systems, and against the military policies of their own kings and their own people.
They were total rebels.
They stood firm to forge, articulate, and protect the pure, ethical monotheism that eventually survived the catastrophic Babylonian exile and became the foundational bedrock of the entire Judeo-Christian heritage. The truth of the one God wasn't born in a pristine, quiet laboratory. It was hammered out and forged in a very real, very messy, very hostile historical crucible.
It makes the faith of an Elijah standing on Mount Carmel or an Isaiah preaching in Jerusalem so much more heroic when you realize they were pushing back against the entire cultural tide of the ancient Near East.
It really does. It frames their bravery perfectly.
We have covered incredible ground today, from a lonely, windswept hill in the Sinai desert to the geopolitical drama of lost and recovered artifacts, to the intricate linguistic battles over the identity of God himself. And as we close, I want to leave you with a final provocative thought to ponder as you go about your day.
And this is such a fascinating point. The great irony of history is how time so often perfectly preserves what we try the hardest to forget.
Right. Think about the biblical King Josiah. The Book of Kings tells us he launched a massive righteous purge across the entire land to destroy every Asherah pole, tear down every high place, and smash every syncretic altar he could find.
He was trying to erase it.
He intended to wipe the slate clean and erase this syncretic history forever. But Kuntillet Ajrud survived his purge. Why? Because it was likely abandoned decades earlier due to its harsh isolation, or perhaps Josiah's men simply bypassed it because it was too remote, buried far too deep in the punishing southern desert to bother with.
They just didn't go out that far.
The profound irony is that the very remoteness that caused the site to be abandoned is what turned it into a perfect, undisturbed time capsule. It preserved the very errors, the very syncretic practices that the prophets fought so hard to destroy.
It's incredible how history works.
And by preserving those errors, it allows us today to look back across 3 millennia and see exactly how far the faith has traveled. It shows us the deep, complex mud from which the prophets pulled the enduring truth. If you enjoyed this journey, please subscribe and follow the Holy Land Path on this platform so you never miss a discovery.
There's always more truth to uncover in the dust.
May the peace of Jerusalem be with you. We leave you with this melody of faith.
The storm is raging, the waves are high. I see the lightning across the sky. The world is shaking, I'm feeling small, but I can hear a distant call. A voice of mercy, a steady light, my strong tower in the dead of night. I'm trading every worry for your peace, watching all my heavy burdens cease. You are the lighthouse, the guiding star. No matter where I go, you're never far. Oh, my foundation in the dead of night. Your grace is shining, burning bright. I'm alive, I'm free, I'm finally home. Because of ocean wide and deep, a promise that you're gonna keep. Victory is won, the